Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning into this week's webinar Wednesday. As you may know, I'm Stephanie Fox from the Network One and I'll be moderating the webinar today. We've got the rest of the team on the call. We've got Julian Balding, Paul Squirrel and Lizzie Gold, so they're on hand if you need any help. Just a bit of housekeeping before I introduce our speaker. Timings wise, we're going to have a 5-minute intro from me, a 35-minute presentation, then we'll have 15 minutes at the end for Q&A, and we will aim to finish by 1:55 BST so you can be ready for your next virtual appointment. Please do keep your microphones muted at all times. We will unmute your microphone if we're calling you to ask a question. That being said, if you could keep your videos on, that would be great so that our speaker has some friendly faces to present to. As I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A portion at the end, but if you think of a question in the meantime, just send them directly to me in the chat. So you just go to your chat box, and where it says to, you should see a drop-down menu. Instead of everyone, select Stephanie Fox. I'll go through all of the questions and we'll select a few to ask Martin Rich once he's finished speaking. So all of the questions should be sent to me in the chat box, not by email, not in the everyone box. It'll just get too confusing. If you would like to ask a question yourself though, just say next to your question, I'll ask. Or if you prefer for me to ask, which is fine as well, just say so in brackets next to your question. Hopefully your Zoom viewing mode is set to speaker view. If not, just click speaker view at the top right of your screen. Our speaker will be showing slides on their screen. So if you can't see their speaker window when the slides are on the screen, just select show active speaker video. For any technical issues, you can message Lizzie Gold either in the chat or you can email Lizzie at lizzie.gold@thenetworkone.com. We're going to be recording this webinar, so if you prefer not to take notes, that's totally fine. And if for any reason the system crashes, just wait a couple of minutes and log back in via the same link that you already used to log in this afternoon. Thanks very much. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Martin Rich, co-founder and executive director of Future Fit Business. Martin is a sustainable investment specialist with over 20 years of experience in both mainstream and in impact finance. In his early career, Martin worked for investment banks JP Morgan, HSBC, and UBS before moving into the field of social impact investment. Spent 7 years as a sales director at Social Finance Ltd. During this time, he recognized the need for a standardized global mechanic to understand the total impact of any investment portfolio on society and the planet. Discussing these ideas in the coffee queue with a stranger resulted in him quitting a well-paid job and co-founding a non-profit business to create the solution, Future Fit Business. In today's webinar, Martin will explain how you can employ their practical tools that track and benchmark real, measurable results from CSR initiatives in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So without further ado, I will turn over to Martin.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie. Hi, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much to those of you who've dialed in. It's lovely to see some of you on the video. Please do turn your videos on. It's always much nicer to be speaking to those. And hi to everybody who's tuned into the recording of this. Stephanie already given you a good introduction. I am indeed an ex-investment banker. Spent the first part of my career, I'm an engineer by training, spent the first 13 years of my career as a financial engineer, working in the derivative space. I always point out to people, it wasn't my fault that the world collapsed. I didn't do it, although I do know some of the people who did. But it was from that journey that took me to a place of realizing that I wanted to use my financial skills and knowledge to help funding for organizations that were doing more to improve the world, to live out their purpose, if you like, which was what took me to the social investment market space. And it was indeed from there that I began to realize that if we were actually going to tackle the big systemic issues that we're facing of runaway climate change, of huge social inequality and injustice, something within the system had to change. And the joke about the coffee queue is entirely true. I was thinking about how could we start to show investors what the impact of any portfolio is on the world. And every portfolio, every investment has an impact on the world through the underlying thing that it's financing. So your pension, your savings, your bank account, these things are having an impact on the world. Might be good, might be bad. Unfortunately, it will be mostly bad because that's just the way the system is at the moment. But how do we understand that? How do we quantify that? How do we start to explain that to the ordinary man and woman in the street who isn't a sustainability expert, but might be concerned about what's going on in the world? How do we create a framework that shows what those things are? That was going through my mind when I was at an event in London, and quite literally the guy behind me tapped me on the shoulder, said, "Hi, my name's Jeff. Who are you? Why are you here?" And we got talking, and we discovered this shared passion for changing the way that business operated and that capital flows around the world operated. And that was about 8 years ago. And then we quite literally quit our jobs, started what became the Future Fit Foundation as a UK-based charity to try and change all of those things. And that's what we're now doing. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that today. We're not going to go into a huge amount of detail. So don't worry, I'm not going to try and blind you with sustainability science. Quite the opposite. I'm going to try and make this really accessible. But more importantly, we're going to try and talk about it from the perspective of how is you as agencies, how do you do this? How do you factor this into what you're doing? Because this is the big story going forward for every company out there. We can no longer ignore environmental and social issues. I am sure you have seen this with your clients. I'd find it hard to believe that you hadn't had any conversations along those lines. So how do you help your clients to be talking about that message in the right way? And how does this framework thing that we've created, how does all of that come together? So if I now try and share my screen, hopefully that is working. I'm getting a thumbs up, always good. And this was the title that I was given, Be Green, Not Mean, which I love. How to make CSR campaigns profitable. And as I was thinking about this, I thought, actually, I don't want to talk about that. What I want to talk about is how do we make the campaigns not so much profitable, actually as genuine. And of course, if they are genuine, then one would hope that that means actually they're genuine and profitable. Because one thing we can know for sure is if we do have a CSR campaign that is not genuine, at some point, it's going to catch you out. Here's a fun example. Volkswagen. I'm sure you've all heard of them. This is the front page of their 2014 sustainability report. The reason it's the 2014 one is because the 2015 one cannot be found anywhere on the internet for love nor money. And the reason for that was because 2015 was the year that Dieselgate broke out, when it transpired that the company had basically been lying about how they were, how their emissions were being measured. And effectively the engines had two modes. There was one mode that you used in everyday life, and there was the mode they used in testing. This was obviously bad. And this was an organization that had tried to sell its cars as environmentally friendly, and you should buy Volkswagen made cars because that was doing your bit towards the environment, when actually it transpired to be a complete and deliberate lie. It wasn't even an accidental lie. So, one example of how these things, if they are not joined up, and I appreciate that it's a CSR report, it's not a project, but if these things aren't lined up, they really come back to bite you. The damage done to that brand, its reputation, its sales, its share price were, huge. And yes, maybe over time the company's managed to rebound, but it's taken it a good few years. And then another great example from earlier this year in the UK. Some of you will be familiar with this, Boohoo Group. They're an online fast fashion retailer aimed very much at the female teenage fast fashion market. And here's a great example of a company that was given a AA rating, so a very good rating, by the leading environmental, social and governance rating organization, a company called MSCI. They gave them a AA rating. That's a really good rating back in the early summer And they lauded this company for being great on sustainability, and particularly in their supply chains. About 3 weeks after that report was published, again, those of you in the UK particularly will know, this company hit the press for all the wrong reasons. It transpired that their controlled suppliers in Leicester, in the Midlands, were being paid about a third of the minimum wage in the UK, and they were being forced to work in conditions where they couldn't separate, socially distance, at a time when the COVID crisis was really kicking off in the country. Absolutely abhorrent behaviour and shocking conditions to find, particularly in a country like the UK. Not that it's acceptable anywhere, but you would hope that that wasn't the case here. It turns out probably that it was. Now, the company have come back fighting and claiming that they didn't know and all the rest of it, and all the legal procedures will unwind over time, and we'll find out the truth, hopefully. But again, the damage done to that company by not being honest, by not being genuine, by not understanding what was going on in its supply chain, just massively caused a huge amount of harm, as well as the underlying negative impact that that was having, obviously, on the individuals involved. So the point I'm making is that in this day and age, you cannot put a foot wrong in this area. If you do, the damage to your brand, the damage to your reputation, damage to share price, to customers staying with you is huge. And as we all know, right, reputations take many years to build and are lost in a matter of minutes. A teenage daughter, friend of a friend, proudly showed me where she deleted the Boohoo app from her phone because she was no longer going to use it. You know, one simple example of how you lose those clients so quickly. So, what is this concept of future fitness? Who are we as an organization? This is our vision. A future fit society is one that will protect the possibility that humans and other life can flourish on Earth forever by being environmentally restorative, socially just, and equally inclusive. Hopefully, as you're listening to that, you won't have any major objections to that as a vision. It's a pretty clear and good vision. Equally, it's great to be able to say things like this, but what does it really mean in practice? Well, again, without diving into huge amounts of detail, we need to start by thinking, well, how do we view the goal of what we are trying to do as a business, the purpose of business, the purpose of the socio-economic system, the purpose that you as agencies are ultimately trying to message? Well, on the screen here is a very famous statement from one of the four founders of the systems science realm, Donella Meadows. And she said, if you define the goal of a society as GDP, gross domestic product, that society will do its best to produce GDP. It will not produce welfare, equity, justice, or efficiency unless you define a goal and regularly measure and report the state of welfare, equity, justice, or efficiency. And this is often shortened to people saying the purpose of a system is what it does. I'll say that again, the purpose of a system is what it does. And what that's basically saying is when you design a system, what it does becomes its purpose. And the problem that we have today is we've defined so much of value creation, the goal of the socio-economic system, as zeroing in on this one financial number, GDP, that's measured across all nations. We don't aim to measure these things like welfare, equity, justice, etc. They're not goals in the system. They're things that we hope for, but they're not things that the system has been built to achieve. And when you start to look at the whole of the way society and the economy work, and you think, wow, we're maximizing everything just as profit. Is it really surprising that we're then facing all of these issues of runaway climate change and social inequity and all these other things? Is it any surprise that those things end up happening? Because what we've said is the purpose of business is to basically rape and pillage the planet and society in pursuit of the mighty dollar. If we're pursuing the wrong things, then we're going to get the wrong outcome. If we define the wrong goal, we're going to define the wrong outcome. So I'm not going to dive into all of these specific sort of climate change and social issues. You're all familiar with them. I'm sure you'll all be reading them in the press. You'll know exactly the types of things that are going on. But we know that we need to change the goal. We know that we need to think about things differently, and that's the messaging that we need to shift. We need to think differently about what we mean by value creation. And the way we at Future Fit look at this is to say we need to shift from this old style model of shareholder value, which again, even if none of you work in finance, which you probably don't, you'll be familiar with that term. But what that means is that we've externalized these costs of planet and society, and we internalize all of the benefits into business for the shareholders, for the owners of that business, which basically says, sod the planet and society, it's all about the return. Well, that's the model that's taken us down this path. We've used up the resources of society and the planet. So they're now screaming and breaking, which is why we're seeing all of the things that we are. So this model simply cannot work over the long term. And yes, it's achieved certain great advantages over the last 50 years, there's no question, but it cannot keep going. Now, in the 90s and the 2000s, thinking began to progress in these spaces, and this concept of shared value came along, where we started to overlap these circles, and we sort of create this like Venn diagram here, where business, the planet, and society overlap. And we started to say, well, this is great. There are areas where business can bring real value to planet and society, and that's a good thing. The problem is there's still all these open areas where we're still causing harm. And how can we argue that the good that's being created in these overlapping areas somehow justifies the damage that's being caused elsewhere? Bringing health to consumers in one part of the world is a good thing. But if that causes massive deforestation in another part of the world, that's causing the complete opposite to local communities, or ultimately bringing climate change to all of us, that's not an acceptable trade-off. So this model is an improvement, but it's not enough. Where we need to get to, we believe, is this concept of what we call system value, which sounds great, but what it basically means is that business is operating within the boundaries of a flourishing society, which then operates within the boundaries of a flourishing planet. We cannot separate planet and society. A flourishing society needs a flourishing planet. If we have runaway climate change, we cannot have a flourishing society because we will have too many people on the move. We will have crop failures. We will have supply chain failures. We'll basically have chaos. And if environmental degradation goes too far, we'll actually have no society at all. And as somebody once famously said, there's no business to be done on a dead planet. So we need to get to a point where we pull business back inside these boundaries, where we operate in a way that the purpose of a business is to rebuild and restock society and the planet and make a financial profit because that is what they are doing, not in spite of the damage that they're causing. So I'm not talking about a utopian dream here. I'm talking about a very practical way of changing the way business is done. And that's the thing that we've created within Future Fit. There's a tool that we have called the Future Fit Business Benchmark. Again, I'm not going to dive into details on that, but just to say what that enables is companies to firstly understand all of the negative impacts that they are having on planet and society because of the way they do business today, to recognize those, to measure them, and to start to plot a route forward to one day when they've eliminated all of those negative impacts. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's a 5, 10, 15, 20-year journey for some companies, longer in some industries. But setting the right trajectory and the right course is critical if we are going to start addressing these systemic issues. What is the harm you're creating? How do you understand it? And what would it mean to transform your business to a point where you're no longer doing that. And actually what you are doing is you're just creating positive impact. You're rebuilding planetary and social boundaries. You are restoring and refilling the system through delivering your purpose as a business. The most exciting conversations that we have with C-suites is when we're in the room and we say to them, look, stop thinking for a minute about limitations of time and money and technology and everything else. What would it mean for your business to be delivering its core purpose, its core services and products in a way that caused no harm, didn't emit greenhouse gases, didn't cause greenhouse gases to be emitted whilst they were being created, didn't lead to waste, were recyclable, treated their employees in the right way, the communities all the way along the supply chains in the right way, reinforced all of those human behaviors? What would that look like if you had no constraints? And the pictures you get back are amazing. As people suddenly project themselves forward 15 years and say, well, I'd love my business to look like this. We'd have planes flying without emitting anything. We would have, whatever it is. And suddenly people have this amazing vision of how to transform their business. You say, great, now if we help you to understand where you are today and you've got that future vision, what would it now look like to plot that journey? What things need to happen? What do you need to change to help you go on that journey? Who do you need to collaborate with from an industry perspective? What financing do you need? And how do you tell that story? I'm not a creative, I don't work in your world, but I imagine that telling that sort of story and that transformational journey, I would hope is getting all of you listening quite excited. Wouldn't you love to be going in and helping people to tell that transformational story? Suddenly, this isn't a CSR add-on. This isn't some nice little tree planting exercise that you're doing in a neighborhood, or a donation that you're making to some worthwhile charity somewhere. Not that there's anything wrong with either of those things, but this is about how do you transform your core business? And then importantly, as part of the system, how do you help others to do exactly the same thing? How do you help your neighbor to reduce their negative impact? How do you amplify their purpose and the positive impact that they're bringing to planet and society? Again, just imagine if we could create a global movement of businesses all moving in this same direction towards this one common destination, one that would actually deliver us the sustainable development goals, that would start to the best of business's ability to be eliminating all of the things that it is causing, be that poverty, be that degradation, be that whatever it may. But eliminating all of those negative impacts and turning it round, turning the pyramid over and saying, actually, we want to be delivering on our purpose as an entity. Our reason for existence is healthy food, easy transport, whatever it might be. But doing that in a way that actually reinforces and rebuilds. One of the organizations that's a lead user of our framework is in the cosmetics industry. They're already talking about what does it mean for every cosmetic you buy to be regenerative. So rather than taking away from rainforest, actually increasing every time you use something. That's mind-blowing. Totally turns the model upside down. How is it rather than taking and wasting, every time you get something, it's actually leading to an increase in the underlying stock, not a decrease? Absolutely incredible thinking. That is the way we need to radically change all business. And we need to help businesses to be making that transformative journey. So ultimately then, what does a future fit business start to look like? Well, there are 3 R's that describe this well. Firstly, they're responsible. It means they identify, they eliminate the harm that they're causing. And the financial institutions that support and underpin all of those companies are using their capital to invest in that transformation of the businesses. That's the first and critical part that we need to start moving along. And these businesses are also regenerative. So this isn't first get rid of your negative and then think about your positive. This is about doing both at the same time. But regenerative in that company success becomes this idea of system value creation, not just financial value, but yes, that's in there as well, but about creating value for the broader society. Its products and services rebuild these system conditions. They add to the global stock of value. And then success, license to operate, customers, staff, everybody get behind that vision, and the company is then financially successful because of that. And the capital flows that come from the financial institutions and the investors around the world are investing into that positive impact. So both that transformation, that elimination of the harm that we're causing, and that reinforcement and that increasing of the positive side of things. And all of that leads to something that's really precedent for all of us right now, which is this idea of resilience. The resilience of just about every single business around the world, and doubtless all of your individual businesses, have been rocked to the core over the last 6 months. How can we withstand a shock like COVID-19? I was chatting with somebody who I was actually with in Australia back in March of this year, when this pandemic was starting to become very, very serious. And we were sort of laughing at the fact that at the time, we'd gone into meetings with a bit of a, oh, we probably shouldn't shake hands anymore, ho, 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 isn't that a bit? And then 2 weeks later, suddenly this thing has quite literally gone viral, has gone around the world and has absolutely shaken every single business. This caught everybody off guard. So how do we build businesses then that are resilient to be able to withstand these types of shocks? Now, if we create a world full of future fit businesses, of course, shocks will still come. Although one would argue that actually, if we're creating a world that isn't as environmentally degraded, isn't as socially unjust, actually, these types of shocks will become less frequent and less severe, because we won't have been creating the breeding grounds for these types of things to be so bad. But of course, shocks will still come along. But if businesses have identified these holistic risks, they are going to be better positioned and better able to stand with each other and support each other through times like this. Yes, bad things will still happen. Yes, businesses will still fail. But we can create a socioeconomic system that is far more resilient and able to withstand these types of shocks than the one we have today, which I think we would probably all agree is anything but resilient and definitely needs to change. The whole idea you might have heard of build back better. Well, think of it quite simply as Future Fit as a roadmap for what that looks like. So we do know what a responsible, regenerative, resilient business community looks like. We do have a roadmap. So if anybody ever says to you, well, we don't even know what that looks like, tell them they're wrong, send them to our website and have a look. We know what this journey needs to look like. What we need to do is get a sufficient movement going that takes people in this direction. Over the last 8 years, as we put this together, working with system science experts, academic experts, issue-specific experts around the world, hundreds of people have fed into our open source framework. And that's enabled us, if you like, to do the hard thinking, to do the hard miles, to show what this journey looks like. Now what we need to do is persuade every business in the world to go on that journey so that we have a chance of having a truly flourishing global future. So as we come into land, and please do be putting your questions in the chat if you have them. I think 3 things just to say as we come in. Firstly, this toolkit that we've provided is open source. It's free. You can go to our website now, futurefitbusiness.org. You can start to download all of the information. We have a video series in there called our Crash Course, 20 short, 5-minute long videos that take you through in a lot more detail all the stuff that I've been talking about. If this subject matter excites you, you're interested in it, go and take a look at those videos. You'll learn lots, you'll have a bit of fun watching them, and if nothing else, that'll be a good thing. But our tool helps businesses to operationalize how they approach these huge issues. So in terms of going on that authentic, meaningful journey, that's what we're trying to help companies do. So for those of you who are interested in telling the story of that journey, then we would hope that the benchmark will be a useful tool to be aligned alongside what you are doing. We're launching in a month's time this program that we call Pioneers, Future Fit Pioneers, which is a club, if you like, a place for businesses to come, those who've committed to going on this journey and to reporting on that journey of telling the story of how they are transforming in order to show how genuine, authentic, and ambitious they're being about this change. And they're going to need help telling that story. We can do the basic things around creating what we call a statement of progress, which is all the underlying data. And that's kind of like the boring essential piece that needs to come out. But the exciting story that lives around that, they're going to need help telling that story. We hope that in time there are going to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions of companies around the world who are committing to this journey. And that might sound a lot, but that's what we need if we're going to bring about the sort of change that we as a foundation have as a vision. And we're growing this global community of companies, of investors, of advisors and individuals to take part in this collective journey. And again, all of these tools, the framework and everything is on our website for free. So you can go and take a look at that right now and begin to familiarize yourself with it. And I think the final point to say then is, how does this really overlap with what you are doing? Well, perhaps for some of you, you actually really want to embed understanding of this into your core business, recognizing that your core business is the comms and the marketing and the PR side of life. But actually to do that in a really authentic way, it might be that you want to learn about this framework. You might want to become one of our certified professionals, as we call them, which is somebody who's been through the training, understands Future Fit, and can then embed that deeply into the services that you are offering to your clients. Or, probably more fitting for more of you, we have this growing community of these certified professionals. And what we'd love to be able to do by having you within our community is by pairing you up, connecting you with these certified professionals within your countries so that you could start to work alongside them and jointly be approaching your clients and differentiating your offer by saying, we really understand this whole sustainability transformation thing. We're experts in this, and we can really embed that in the messaging that we're designing for you. So that's just two ideas that sort of come off the top of my head. I'm sure you will have hundreds of other ideas of how you can embed all of this. But I hope, if nothing else, it's just been interesting to learn about how the world is changing around how we're looking at sustainability, the transformational journeys that companies are beginning to go on. What is the cutting edge thinking around this? I really look forward to receiving your questions now. For those of you who are listening to the recording, please feel free to reach out. Stephanie's going to share some contact details now. So please feel free to take a look at our website, reach out to me personally, and I would love to connect with you and discuss more. But I think, Stephanie, back to you, and we'll dive into some questions, hopefully.
Great, thank you so much. That was excellent. So we have had some questions from the audience. Someone has said, the UN sustainability goals have been around for a while. Do you feel they are too hard for most SME companies to interpret and act on?
That's a great question. Yes, is the simple answer. But the reason for that is that the Sustainable Development Goals were put together in 2015 now, and they operate at nation state level. When you actually read the underlying, so that there are 17 goals. Underneath that, there are 169 targets. And those targets are at an incredibly high level. So even your multinational corporations are really struggling to sort of know how to deal with these, because they're not designed even at that level. Again, they're designed at nation level. So for an SME to be trying to tackle those is like, well, hang on, this is far too over. What do I do about global poverty? SDG number 1, no poverty. Would I conceptually agree with the idea of a world without poverty? Well, hopefully nearly everybody would say yes to that. So the way that we help organizations to approach this, we ask, again, direct people to our website. We have a page dedicated to the SDGs. The way to think about it is there are 2 elements, the do no harm and the reinforcing. Firstly, what are you doing as a business to minimize any harm that you might be causing to our progress towards the SDGs? So a simple example would be one of our break-even goals is everybody must be paid a living wage. Because we would argue if you're not paying a living wage, you're actually making the situation of poverty worse. So the first thing you should be thinking about in that case is, okay, well, if I can do everything within my power to at least pay everybody who I directly pay, at least the living wage, work out what that is locally if there isn't an official number, and make sure I'm paying everybody at least that. What about the suppliers that I use? Can I start to tell them, I want them to be doing the same? What can you start to do to make sure that even a simple bar like that is reached across all of your own organization and those that you have direct contact with? Likewise, use of renewable energy. One of the simplest things most people can do, certainly in most developed countries, is to change to a genuine renewable energy tariff. Very simple to do, might cost you a little bit more money, but if you're serious about this, maybe you're prepared to do that. And then on the positive side of things, what can you do to be reinforcing the global movement towards the Sustainable Development Goals? Of course, you can't tackle good health or poverty globally on your own, but you can be saying, what is my core purpose as an organization? How do I make sure that on 1 or maybe at most 2 of these goals, I can be doing something that aligns with my purpose? For the folks listening to this call, I would say you're all about storytelling. You're all about messaging. You're about bringing that news or whatever it is your clients want. Are you doing that in a genuine and authentic manner? Are you actually telling those stories in a way that they're really telling the truth, that are reinforcing everything that we should be moving towards? Or are you just reinforcing perhaps some of the old bad style of pretending that bad things are good or whatever it might be? Again, not wishing to sort of tell you guys how to do your job, but that would be how you could then really start to help in, even as a tiny SME. How can you start reinforcing that movement? You're saying, I'm doing everything that's within my power to not be making the world a worse place, and I'm doing everything within my power to make the world a tiny bit better. And that sort of drops in the ocean is what will ultimately get us somewhere closer to the vision of the SDGs.
That's really helpful, thank you. We've had another question. Someone has said, could you tell us briefly of a business that has done this successfully? So an example or a case study of sorts.
Absolutely. Where's some fun examples? So The Body Shop, one of our lead users, they are doing all sorts of different pieces. So I referenced them slightly earlier when talking about this idea of regenerative cosmetics, which is something they've been doing with their parent, which is a Brazilian company called Natura. They're thinking about what does it mean to embed this thinking all the way through the different elements now of the design process, the packaging, the chemicals that they're using. So there's a business which, of course, you'll hopefully all be familiar with it, over 40 years old now, and started on day one. It had this positive ethos, right, in the DNA of the business from day one, right? And the no animal testing was their big thing from the start. But this idea of doing things in the right way has always been in the core of the business, but now they're looking at what does it mean to be truly regenerative? How do we justify our position in the world by being able to change every single piece of the jigsaw? So they're literally going through bit by bit by bit in the whole manufacturing process, starting to look at all the different elements and try and embed this thinking so that every time they design a new piece of packaging or they're thinking about buying some new materials or whatever it might be, this thought process starts to go through people's heads. Doesn't mean they're perfect yet, and they know they're not. But have a look at some of the sustainability goals that they've set themselves. Super ambitious, amazing marketing around as well. I think it's great branding and all the rest of it. There's some good stuff going to be coming out in the coming months as well. So go and have a look at the Body Shop website. Another, give you a real sort of detail example. Novo Nordisk is a Danish pharmaceutical company. They make about half the world's insulin. So you may have come across them by name, or you may have come across the product at some point. But they've gone through and done a full benchmarking of where they are from a future fit perspective. And one of our goals relates to water usage, and particularly water usage in water scarce regions. And the good news is that they're up in the high 90% on their progress indicators, so they're nearly future fit on that goal. But what they then discovered is that one of their manufacturing plants is in China and is in a water scarce region of China, and that's why they're not at 100%. And firstly, this made them think, well, if only we'd known this when we were first building and positioning that plant, maybe we would have built that somewhere else. Maybe we'd have thought about the infrastructure that would have allowed us to bring in the necessary water from a non-water scarce region. Different decisions could have been made had we had that information. Now, even more complicated, they want to increase production in that plant. What that plant is doing is a key part of their growth plans. So they want to up production. Well, upping production means you have to up the water usage. So now their water score would go down. And they say, well, hang on a second, that's going in the wrong direction now. We want to improve, not get worse. So how do we increase productivity of this in this plant, but in a way that's not going to harm that score? Not for the sake of the score, but for the sake of not using the water in a water scarce region. So that's now taking them down some really radical pathways of thinking about how do we improve the efficiency of the manufacturing by using less water, doing it in different ways, perhaps using no water or closed loop cycles, whatever it might be. But it's causing them to radically challenge how they're making that drug in that place. But the upside of that will be the learnings from that is something that they can then push out to other plants, out to the sector as a whole. And so we're all going to learn from whatever innovation comes through that thinking, that without even that one goal, they wouldn't have gone down that route. So now multiply that type of thinking across all of the different future fit goals, across all of the different industries and sectors who are using it. We start to see how we get that thinking moving in the right direction. So that's quite a general example and one very specific example. So hopefully that answers the question. The other thing just to say, again, please go, if you go to our website, we actually have a whole page of case studies. So just go to the website, click on the little menu burger in the top right-hand corner, and you can jump to case studies, and you'll find case studies from some of the investors who are using this, some of the other businesses. And hopefully you'll find those. They're short, they're snappy, they're not long reads. So please do go and check that out.
Perfect, thank you. I got another question from the audience. Someone said, Martin, are we actually advising businesses then to begin a total transformation to sustainable products and goals over a period of time, citing, of course, that they need to if they are to be relevant, e.g. a lube company moves to renewables?
Absolutely, absolutely, that's what we're saying. Again, back to the early diagram I showed of the nested circles. I mean, that's why our logo as Future Fit is the three nested circles. We all have to get into that position. We all have to be playing that game. At the moment, those three circles are completely disaggregated, if we carry on the path we're going, not wishing to sort of oversell it, we are quite literally doomed as a species. It is that serious. So we all have to be playing our part. And of course, if we all start saying, well, you know, it's okay, but I'm an airline, I can't really radically transform. And then the oil industry says, well, yes, but we're the oil industry, we can't really radically transform because we'll get nowhere. So what we have to do is recognize the trajectory and the pathway that we all need to be on. That's what Future Fit's trying to show, so that we do have that radical shift that takes us back to where we need to be. And this isn't Future Fit coming out and saying, this is what you must do. We've just created a roadmap based off what science tells us is important. And sadly, we're a very, very long way from where we need to be, which is why the transformation that we need is so radical. If we weren't so far off course, we wouldn't have to course correct so badly. Unfortunately, as we probably all know, we are. So it's about understanding, then encouraging people to go on that journey. Our job is to route map it. I'm presuming your job is to tell the stories and to try and encourage people to go on that journey, because ultimately this is going to be good for business as well as good for society as a whole. But absolutely, those radical transformations have to be made. We all have to be aiming back within those boundaries. And maybe one day we can get to a point where there's enough positive in some areas going on that can allow for some negative somewhere else. But the reality is the only time that really works is carbon. Carbon is pretty much the only thing you can offset by taking a kilo of carbon out over here and putting a kilo of carbon in here. When you think about things like living wage, you can't double the pay of the chief exec and halve the pay of everybody else and say, well, on average, we're all getting a living wage. You know, those sorts of things don't really offset. So yeah, absolutely. Radical transformation is what we need as quickly as possible.
I'd agree with that. Thank you. Right, we've got time for maybe one more question. So someone has said, as independent agencies, we're private companies, so not listed on the stock market. Mm-hmm. Do you see different behavior from private companies from publicly quoted companies?
So I'm going to answer two questions there. Do we see different behavior and do we need different behavior? Clearly the answer to the do we need different behavior is no. We all need, again, to be doing the same things. We all need to be moving in this direction. So whether you're private or you're public or whatever, we all need to be going in that direction. So every one of you listening, you need to be taking your businesses in this direction as well. I would love every single agency here to become a Future Fit pioneer themselves, because that says I'm going on this journey. And the upside, of course, of private companies, be they small or big, is it's within their control to change. The challenge that we have sometimes with the listed companies is actually there's so many stakeholders, it's very easy to prevaricate and not drive change. Now, what we are seeing across all of the big companies, all of the big listed companies, is an increasing focus on these issues. Sometimes that's very genuine. Unfortunately, inevitably, a lot of greenwashing comes with that. Obviously, I hope all of you are not in any way, shape or form guilty of that. I hope you won't be after this call, if nothing else. But we are seeing big pressure from investors and shareholders to start asking companies to be more transparent about how they're changing and the things that they are doing. But these are big ships, and as we know, big ships take a very long time to turn. It's important that they do turn. It's very important they turn, because their impacts are huge. Their ability to impact supply chains is enormous. As smaller businesses, it's kind of the flip side. You're small, you're nimble, you're able to make change. If you're owned and operated, by the owner, you're able to just make those decisions, say, this is the right thing to do, we're going in this direction, we're going to do it now. Obviously, the ability to leverage things around you and the impact you're having is commensurately a lot smaller. But ultimately, we need everybody to be moving in this direction. So if you're able to change your business because you control it, then what's stopping you? Why don't you want to go in this direction? Why don't you want to make the world a better workplace in that way when it's within your control to do?
Perfect. Thanks so much. Right, that is all we have time for today. So I'm just going to go and share your details on my screen. So hopefully everyone can see that. So I would just like to say a really big thank you to Martin for that fantastic webinar. If you didn't have time to ask your question, you can contact Martin via email at martin@futurefitbusiness.org, which you can now see on the screen. Or you can contact his colleague Alicia Ayers, who is head of ecosystem, at alicia@futurefitbusiness.org. If people are interested in joining a group to talk about this theme and publish a collection of essays on it, please get in contact with Julian Balding. His email address is julian.balding@thenetwork1.com, and that can also be found on our website. Thank you all for coming. We really hope you enjoyed it. We will be holding webinars at the same time every Wednesday. The next one will be held on October the 7th, titled Overcoming the Creativity Gap at Work. So no one would dispute that greater creativity at work leads to greater business success. But few business leaders really know if their business creates the conditions for creativity to thrive, particularly during the current pandemic. Firehouse founder Beth Pope has been running their Conditions for Creativity assessment tool with businesses, both agencies and client side, before and through the pandemic, helping them to identify where their creative strengths and weaknesses lie. In our upcoming webinar, Beth Pope will join us and she will share the 9 conditions for creativity at work and where most businesses tend to succeed and fail based on their data. Future webinar Wednesdays can be found on our website under events at www.thenetwork1.com/webinars. We hope to see you there. Thank you again, Martin, for a fantastic presentation. Thank you to all for joining us and have a great day.